She thought the human was helpless, until he triggered the hidden power. Quantum entanglement. Commander Leona Valari of the Ardani Science Directorate ripped another panel free from the transport shuttle's communication array, her four-fingered hands working with practiced precision despite her mounting frustration. The iridescent scales along her forearms flickered between deep violet and angry red as she evaluated the damage. Completely fried, she muttered, tossing the useless component aside. Just like everything else on this primitive vessel. Lieutenant Nico Reeves looked up from where he was assessing their emergency supplies, his weathered face betraying only mild annoyance at her continued criticism. The STS Horizon was built to withstand atmospheric entry on 14 different planetary types, not getting struck by lightning while flying through an uncharted electromagnetic storm. A properly designed Ardani ship would have adapted to the storm's frequency, Leona countered, her vertical pupils narrowing as she surveyed their crash site. The shuttle had carved a jagged path through phosphorescent vegetation before coming to rest at the edge of a ravine on this unexplored moon. Beyond the swaying alien flora, oddly geometric shapes jutted from the misty horizon, clearly artificial structures of some kind. And yet your Ardani delegation chose our primitive transport for this mission, Nico replied with a hint of satisfaction. He closed the supply crate and straightened to his full height, still a handspan shorter than Leona's willowy frame. Emergency rations will last 3 weeks if we're careful. The distress beacon is functional but short-range. 3 weeks trapped here with a human, she sighed, membrane lids briefly closing over her large amber eyes. The diplomatic corps owes me significant compensation for this ordeal. Nico shouldered his pack and checked his sidearm. The settlement on Proxima 4 is expecting our arrival in 4 days. When we don't show, they'll dispatch search vessels. He gestured toward the distant structures. Those ruins might provide better shelter than the shuttle. Maybe even materials we can use for repairs. Those are clearly precursor ruins, Leona said, her scientific interest momentarily overriding her displeasure. Possibly dating back to the third expansion era. Untouched, by the looks of them. All the more reason to investigate, Nico said, already starting toward them. Leona's scaled brow ridge furrowed. You humans, always rushing toward the unknown without proper analysis. Analysis won't keep us alive if another storm hits, Nico called back without breaking stride. Besides, I thought the great Ardani Science Directorate lived for discovery. Muttering under her breath about human recklessness, Leona gathered her research equipment and followed. The trek took 3 hours across undulating terrain covered in bioluminescent moss that responded to their footsteps with pulses of soft blue light. As they drew closer, the structures revealed themselves to be graceful spires of an iridescent material that seemed to phase between solid and translucent depending on viewing angle. Magnificent, Leona breathed, momentarily forgetting her companion as she approached the nearest spire. Its surface was etched with symbols that shifted subtly, as if alive. These patterns correspond to theoretical quantum equations we've only recently begun to understand. Nico circled the structure, keeping a respectful distance. Any idea what this place was for? Research facility, perhaps, or a communication hub. She ran a scanner over the symbols. The precursors disappeared 50,000 years ago, leaving ruins like this across 17 known systems. No one has ever fully activated their technology. Why not? Leona shot him a look usually reserved for particularly slow students. Because their systems were key to their unique neurological patterns. Other species lacked the necessary. She stopped as Nico approached what appeared to be an entrance flanked by smaller pillars. Don't touch anything, she called sharply. These sites often have defense. Her warning came too late. Nico had placed his palm against a recessed panel beside the entrance. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a low hum that seemed to vibrate through their bones, lines of light traced up from the panel, across Nico's arm, and spread throughout the structure. The entrance dilated open. Mechanisms, Leona finished weakly, staring in disbelief. Nico looked as surprised as she was. That wasn't supposed to happen, was it? Impossible, she whispered, rushing to examine the panel. Precursor technology has never responded to any known species, especially not to humans. Your neural architecture is comparatively simplistic. Thanks for the compliment, Nico said dryly. He peered into the now open doorway where soft light illuminated a corridor that descended into the ground. Coming. We should wait. Establish proper research protocols. Document the exterior thoroughly before. The sky darkened suddenly as angry clouds gathered with unnatural speed. The air crackled with the same energy that had brought down their shuttle. Another storm, Nico said grimly. Research later. Survival now. With clear reluctance, Leona followed him into the structure just as the first lightning bolt struck where they had been standing moments before. The entrance sealed behind them, leaving them in the softly lit corridor. See, Nico flashed a triumphant smile. Sometimes the direct approach works best. Trapped in an unknown precursor facility with potentially lethal automated systems, Leona retorted. Brilliant strategy, Lieutenant. Better than being vaporized outside. He started down the corridor. And you can call me Nico. Rank seems a bit formal when we're the only two people on an uncharted moon. The corridor opened into a vast chamber where crystalline formations jutted from floor and ceiling, meeting in complex geometric patterns. Platforms of varying heights rose from the floor, connected by bridges that appeared and disappeared at intervals. It's reconfiguring itself, Leona said, watching in fascination as the room shifted. Responding to our presence. She approached one of the crystal formations, careful not to touch it. These could be data storage units or power conduits. The configuration suggests. A holographic display suddenly materialized before them, showing symbols similar to those outside but now in animated sequences. Can you read it? Nico asked. Not exactly, but Leona hesitated, analyzing the patterns. It's running some sort of diagnostic, or possibly a recognition protocol. The symbols coalesced into a three-dimensional model of what might have been a precursor, a being with elongated limbs and a cranial structure unlike any known species. The model rotated, then shifted, its form blurring before resolving into something new, a rough approximation of a human. It's scanning you, Leona realized, her scientific curiosity overwhelming her earlier caution. Attempting to identify your species. The hologram shifted again, this time forming a representation of an Ardani, complete with scaled skin and four-fingered hands. Then it merged the two forms, human and Ardani, the combined figure pulsing with light before dissipating. What does that mean? Nico asked. Before Leona could answer, a section of the floor slid away, revealing a descending spiral staircase formed of the same shifting material as the exterior spires. It wants us to proceed deeper, she said, both excited and apprehensive. You sure that's wise? Leona gave him a surprised look. Now you're advocating caution? Mysterious alien technology suddenly inviting us downstairs? Seems worth a moment's consideration. A faint tremor shook the chamber, and several crystal formations darkened. The storm's affecting the facility's power systems, Leona observed. If we want answers, we should move before everything shuts down. They descended the staircase, which illuminated each step just before their feet touched it. The air grew cooler, carrying unfamiliar scents that reminded Nico of ozone and something like ancient books. The staircase ended in another chamber, smaller but more densely packed with technology. At its center stood what appeared to be a control console surrounding a throne-like chair sized for a being considerably larger than either of them. This is remarkable, Leona whispered, approaching the console. These configurations suggest capabilities far beyond even current Ardani understanding. Nico circled the room cautiously. Any idea what this place was for? Based on these readings, she said, consulting her scanner, it might be a nexus point for a larger network. Perhaps a control center for multiple facilities across different systems. The console suddenly activated, interfaces appearing above its surface. Symbols flashed rapidly, then stabilized into patterns that seemed almost, but not quite, readable. It's asking for input, Leona said, studying the interface, but without understanding the language. Nico approached, looking over her shoulder. Those symbols there, he pointed, they're similar to the ones that opened the entrance. Yes, but the sequencing is different, more complex. We'd need to. Without warning, Nico reached past her and touched a sequence of symbols. The console flared with light, and a low hum filled the chamber. What are you doing? Leona hissed, grabbing his wrist. You could trigger security protocols or destabilize the entire facility. I recognized the pattern, he said simply. It felt, right? The chair at the center began to rotate, and panels in the floor slid open. From each opening rose pedestals bearing objects that resembled armor pieces, gauntlets, chest plates, helmets, all made of the same shifting material as the building itself. Precursor artifacts, Leona breathed. Perfectly preserved. A distant mechanical sound echoed through the facility, followed by a tremor stronger than before. That didn't feel like the storm, Nico said, suddenly alert. Security systems, Leona confirmed, checking her scanner. You've activated some kind of. The floor vibrated beneath them, and a section of wall slid away to reveal a corridor they hadn't noticed before. From its depths came sounds of movement, mechanical and purposeful. Defense drones, Leona said, fear evident in her voice. We need to leave. Now. They turned toward the staircase, but it had vanished, the floor smooth where it had been. Other exits? Nico asked, drawing his sidearm. Leona scanned quickly. There, she pointed to a faint outline in the far wall. Possible maintenance access. They moved toward it as the mechanical sounds grew louder. Just as they reached the hidden door, the first drone emerged from the corridor, a floating sphere bristling with appendages that ended in tools or weapons. Run! Nico pushed Leona through the doorway as the drone fired, the energy blast scorching the wall where they'd stood. They found themselves in a narrow service tunnel, dimly lit by strips of bioluminescence along the floor. They ran, hearing the drone attempting to reconfigure itself to fit through the smaller passage. I told you not to touch anything, Leona panted as they raced through the tunnel. And you were right, Nico admitted. But why did it respond to me at all? You said precursor tech doesn't work for other species. It shouldn't, she said. Unless. She slowed, a theory forming. The interface responded to both of us. First outside, then at the console. What if it wasn't designed for a single species? What if it was meant to detect interspecies cooperation? Another tremor shook the facility, and the lights flickered. Interesting theory, Nico said, urging her forward again. Let's discuss it when we're not being hunted by ancient security systems. As they turned a corner, the tunnel widened into another chamber, smaller than the others, but equally dense with technology. And at its center, pulsing with the same shifting light as everything else, was something that looked very much like an escape pod. Emergency evacuation system? Nico suggested. Or a trap, Leona countered, but she was already moving toward it, her scanner working furiously. However, given our limited options, the drone's mechanical whirring grew closer. Nico positioned himself between the tunnel entrance and Leona. Whatever you're going to do it fast, he said, aiming his sidearm at the darkness. Leona's fingers danced over the pod's exterior, searching for an activation mechanism. It's not responding. She stopped, looking back at Nico. I need you. If my theory is correct, it requires both of us. Nico backed toward her, keeping his weapon trained on the tunnel. As the first glint of the drone's metallic surface appeared, he reached the pod. What do I do? Place your hand here. She guided his palm to a panel similar to the one at the entrance. And I'll place mine here. She positioned her four-fingered hand on an adjacent panel. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, as the drone emerged fully into the chamber, the pod hummed to life, its surface rippling like liquid metal. It's working, Leona exclaimed. Quick, inside. The pod's surface parted like a curtain, revealing an interior that seemed impossibly spacious compared to its external dimensions. They tumbled inside just as the drone fired, the blast harmlessly absorbed by the pod's shifting exterior. The opening sealed behind them, and the pod's interior illuminated with soft light. Control interfaces appeared, floating in the air before them. Can you fly this thing? Nico asked, watching as the drone circled the pod, scanning for weaknesses. I'm not even sure what this thing is, Leona admitted. She studied the interfaces, her scientific training battling with their urgent need to escape. But it seems to be responding to our combined presence. If we work together. Their eyes met, mutual understanding passing between them despite their differences. In that moment, something shifted, not just in the ancient technology surrounding them, but in their perception of each other. Tell me what to do, Nico said simply. As the facility trembled around them and the drone prepared another attack, Leona began explaining her theory, how the precursors might have created systems that required different species to cooperate, different minds to solve problems together. And how, against all probability, a human and an Ardani might be exactly what this ancient protocol had been waiting for. Convergent evolution. The ancient pod hummed with energy as it detached from its docking station, leaving the security drone firing uselessly at empty space. Inside, Leona and Nico worked in cautious tandem, their hands moving across the ethereal interface with increasing confidence. The controls are adapting to our input, Leona observed, her amber eyes reflecting the shifting symbols before her. It's learning our cognitive patterns. Where exactly is it taking us? Nico asked, watching through a viewport as they accelerated through a crystalline tunnel, leaving the chamber far behind. According to these readings, toward the central core of the facility. Leona's iridescent scales rippled with excitement despite their precarious situation. If my theory is correct, this entire structure was designed as a test, one requiring different species to work together. Why would the precursors care about interspecies cooperation? Nico adjusted his position as the pod banked sharply around a corner. Perhaps they recognized something we're only beginning to understand, she replied, her usual condescension absent. That true advancement comes not from isolation but from diversity of thought. The tunnel opened into a vast spherical chamber that took their breath away. Suspended at its center was a pulsating crystalline structure, a massive geometric formation that seemed to be composed of pure energy as much as matter. Bridges of light extended from various points along the chamber's circumference, all converging on the central crystal. Their pod settled onto a docking platform, and its surface parted to allow them exit. Is it safe? Nico asked, eyeing the seemingly solid light bridge that connected their platform to the central structure. Leona ran her scanner over it. The bridge is composed of stabilized photons. Theoretically sound. She stepped onto it, and the light held firm. See? Perfect. The bridge suddenly flickered, and Leona stumbled. Nico lunged forward, catching her arm just as the bridge rematerialized. For a moment, they stood frozen, his hand wrapped around her scaled wrist, their faces inches apart. Perfect. You were saying? Nico smiled. Leona withdrew her arm with as much dignity as she could muster. A momentary fluctuation. The storm must be affecting the power systems. They continued across the bridge, both noticing how it stabilized whenever they walked side by side, but fluctuated when either moved too far ahead. It needs both of us, Nico observed. Like everything else in this place. The central crystal loomed larger as they approached. Within its faceted depths, images shifted and changed, star maps, mathematical equations, what might have been historical records of the precursors themselves. It's a data repository, Leona whispered. Possibly the most complete record of precursor knowledge ever discovered. A console waited at the bridge's end, directly before the crystal. Unlike the others they'd encountered, this one had two distinct interface panels, clearly designed for different appendages. One seemed perfectly shaped for an Ardani's four-fingered hand, the other for a human's 5 fingers. Now this can't be a coincidence, Nico said, examining the human-shaped interface. They couldn't have known about our specific species 50,000 years ago. Not specifically, no. Leona studied the console with professional appreciation. But they could have designed systems adaptable enough to recognize compatible neurological patterns across evolutionary lines. Convergent evolution at the cognitive level. A distant explosion echoed through the chamber, and the entire structure shuddered. The storm's getting worse, Nico said. Leona shook her head. That wasn't atmospheric. Something else has entered the facility. Before they could discuss further, the crystal pulsed, and a holographic representation appeared before them, a timeline showing various species evolving across different worlds, eventually converging toward common cognitive structures despite physical differences. It's trying to explain, Leona realized. The precursors weren't looking for specific species. They were looking for compatible minds, regardless of form. Another explosion, closer this time, and the bridge behind them flickered ominously. Someone else is here, Nico said, drawing his sidearm. And they're not bothering with the subtle approach. The hologram shifted, showing the facility's exterior where 3 vessels had landed, sleek, predatory craft bearing markings Leona recognized with dismay. Venturi mercenaries, she hissed. Professional tech scavengers. They must have detected the power surge when we activated the facility. How long before they reach us? Minutes at most. They're using breaching charges instead of trying to solve the access protocols. The crystal pulsed again, and the hologram now displayed the central chamber, their current location, with areas highlighted in warning colors. The facility's defenses are offline, Leona interpreted. Power diverted to maintain core functions during the storm. Can we reactivate them? Leona's eyes met his, a new respect visible in their amber depths. We can try. They positioned themselves at the console, each facing the interface designed for their species. As they placed their hands on the controls, the crystals pulsing synchronized with their heartbeats, creating a resonance they could feel in their bones. "It's scanning us more deeply," Leona said. "Neural patterns, emotional states, biochemical responses. Is that a good thing? Unknown. But given our alternatives." The console responded to their touch, displays coming alive with streaming data. Leona translated as quickly as she could, her scientific training pushed to its limits. "Defense grid, power management, communication array. It's giving us control of the entire facility," she said in growing excitement. "But there's something else. Something about resonance testing and compatibility verification." Nico studied the human interface, finding to his surprise that certain patterns were becoming intelligible. This section seems to be about the facility's purpose. Testing species not just for intelligence, but for, I'm not sure how to translate it, harmonic potential? Another explosion rocked the chamber, closer still. Through viewports along the wall, they could see figures moving on distant platforms, mercenaries in environmental suits, weapons at the ready. "We need those defenses online now," Nico urged. Leona's fingers flew across her interface. "Working on it." "But the power requirements," she stopped, a realization dawning. "The facility isn't just measuring our separate abilities. It's measuring how we work together." "Like the bridge," Nico nodded. "Stronger when we're in sync." "Exactly. The defense systems won't activate unless we demonstrate true cooperation." She gestured to the interfaces. "We need to coordinate our inputs precisely." "Tell me what to do." Leona began explaining a sequence of commands, guiding Nico through his half of the process while she handled hers. At first, their efforts were halting, discordant. The crystals pulsing became erratic, and warning symbols flashed across the displays. "It's not working," Nico said, frustration evident. "We're still approaching this as separate tasks." Leona paused, considering. "You're right. We need to." She hesitated, the concept foreign to her scientific mindset. "We need to harmonize. Not just our actions, but our intentions." Their eyes met again, and something passed between them, an acknowledgement of their differences and a willingness to bridge them. "Like this," Nico said softly, and began a new sequence without explanation. To Leona's surprise, she found herself responding instinctively, her inputs complementing his in ways she couldn't have planned. The crystals pulsing steadied, growing stronger, and the warning symbols faded. "It's working," she whispered, feeling the shift in the facility's energy. "How did you know?" Nico's face showed concentration, but also something like wonder. "I didn't. I just felt what was needed and trusted you would too." Around them, defense systems hummed to life. Shield generators engaged, creating barriers that stopped the mercenaries' advance. Security drones, now under their control, moved to intercept the intruders. But the mercenaries weren't retreating. Their leader, visible now on a platform 2 levels below, directed teams to plant more breaching charges on critical junctions. "They're targeting structural supports," Leona warned. "If they can't have the technology, they'll destroy it to prevent others from claiming it." "Can we evacuate? Get back to the pod?" She checked the displays. "Not without passing through areas they control." Her scaled hands paused over the interface. "There's another option. The communication array. Send a distress signal? More than that. This facility has quantum entanglement technology. We could potentially contact the Ardani outpost in the Vega system directly, regardless of distance." "Do it." Together, they redirected power to the communication systems, their actions now flowing in natural synchrony. The crystal responded, its facets reconfiguring to focus energy toward a previously dormant section of the chamber. A communication pillar rose from the floor, humming with potential. But as Leona began the transmission sequence, the displays flashed warnings. "What's wrong?" Nico asked. "The quantum alignment requires." She read the symbols twice to be sure. "It requires a neural link between us. The transmission needs to be encoded through both our cognitive patterns simultaneously." Nico considered this. Side effects. Unknown, but likely. Intimate. Our thought processes would temporarily merge. Another explosion shook the chamber. On the displays, they could see the mercenaries making progress despite the defenses. "We're out of options," Nico said. "I'm willing if you are." Leona studied him, this human who had continually surprised her, whose approach to problems was so different from her own yet somehow complementary. "I am." The neural interface emerged from the communication pillar, 2 headsets, each adapted to their species' cranial structure. They donned them as the crystal's pulsing accelerated, creating a field of energy that enveloped them both. The connection, when it formed, was overwhelming. Leona gasped as Nico's thoughts flowed into her consciousness, not as words, but as sensations, images, emotional currents. She felt his courage, his curiosity, his growing respect for her. And beneath it all, a warmth she hadn't expected. For Nico, the experience was equally profound. Leona's mind was structured differently than his, patterns of logic and scientific understanding interwoven with cultural perspectives he'd never imagined. Yet beneath these differences lay familiar emotions, determination, wonder, and a reluctant but growing admiration for him. Together, their merged consciousness shaped the transmission, a distress call containing not just data about their situation and location, but the very essence of their experience within the facility. As the transmission completed, the neural link began to fade. But something of it lingered, a ghost of connection, a new understanding that couldn't be undone. That was. Nico began. Unprecedented, Leona finished, removing her headset with slightly trembling hands. The chamber shuddered again, and on the displays they watched the mercenaries' relentless advance. Despite their efforts, the facility's defenses were failing against the concentrated assault. The transmission worked, Leona confirmed. Help will come, but not quickly enough. Then we need a fallback position. Somewhere defensible until rescue arrives. The crystal pulsed once more, and new information flowed across the displays. Leona translated rapidly, her expression changing from concern to wonder. There's another chamber, deeper still, a sanctuary of sorts, designed to protect. She paused, ensuring her translation was correct. To protect those who passed the compatibility test. Is that what we did? Passed their test? It appears so. She studied the readouts. The sanctuary has independent power systems and can withstand considerable damage to the outer facility. How do we access it? Before Leona could answer, the crystal's energy field expanded dramatically, enveloping them completely. The sensation was similar to the neural link, but physical rather than mental, as if they were being scanned at the atomic level. When the field receded, the crystal had changed. Its center now contained what appeared to be a portal, a doorway composed of the same shifting energy that characterized all precursor technology. I believe, Leona said with scientific understatement, that is our access point. On the displays, they watched as the mercenaries breached the final barrier before the central chamber. They had minutes, perhaps seconds. Nico held out his hand to Leona. Together. She hesitated only briefly before taking it, her scaled fingers intertwining with his. It seems to be what the precursors intended. They stepped into the portal as the first mercenaries entered the chamber behind them. The sensation was momentarily disorienting, like being deconstructed and reassembled at the quantum level. When reality stabilized, they found themselves in a space unlike any they'd seen before. The sanctuary was smaller than the central chamber, but somehow more elegant in its design. Its walls appeared to be composed of pure energy held in perfect geometric patterns. At its center stood a single crystalline pedestal, upon which rested an object that drew their attention immediately. Is that what I think it is? Nico asked. Leona approached the pedestal with reverent caution. A data crystal, possibly containing the sum total of precursor knowledge. Before they could examine it further, a holographic message formed above the pedestal, not in precursor symbols, but in modern languages they both understood. To those who have proven worthy, Leona read aloud. We entrust our legacy, not to a single species, but to the bonds between different minds. The message continued, explaining what they had already begun to suspect. The precursors had not disappeared, but rather had evolved beyond physical form. Before their transcendence, they had created these facilities, tests to identify species capable of true cooperation across biological and cultural divides. They believed evolutionary competition eventually leads to self-destruction, Nico summarized, unless balanced by the ability to form deeper connections. And they left their knowledge not to the strongest or most advanced species, Leona continued, but to those who could demonstrate this balance. The sanctuary trembled slightly, the distant effects of the mercenaries' destruction still reaching them even here. But the message assured them the core would remain protected until rescue could arrive. So now we wait, Nico said, sitting on a formed surface that adjusted to his human physiology. Now we wait, Leona agreed, taking a similar seat. She studied him openly now, her scientific curiosity no longer masking her personal interest. I'm still processing what I experienced during our Neuralink. Anything surprising? He asked with a small smile. Several things. Most notably your perception of me. Her scales shimmered with subtle emotion. You find me beautiful. Nico didn't deny it. Intelligence, determination, and scales that change color with your emotions? What's not to appreciate? By Ardani standards, humans are. She searched for a diplomatic phrase. Primitive? Reckless? Impossibly arrogant, he supplied, echoing her earlier criticisms. I was going to say unexpectedly complex. Her amber eyes met his. I may have misjudged your species, or at least one particular representative. High praise indeed from the science directorate. Not from the directorate, she corrected. From me. Around them, the sanctuary hummed with ancient energy, protecting not just the precursor knowledge, but the new understanding forming between two beings from worlds apart. On the sanctuary's displays, they could see rescue vessels already responding to their quantum transmission, Ardani ships moving at maximum speed toward their location. When we return, Leona said thoughtfully, this discovery will change everything. The precursor artifacts, the compatibility testing, the neural technology. Not to mention the precedent of an Ardani scientist and a human lieutenant working together effectively, Nico added. Yes. She considered him with new appreciation. Perhaps the diplomatic corps will need representatives experienced in cross-species cooperation to study the findings. People who've demonstrated harmonic potential? Nico suggested. Precisely. Her scales shimmered with a color he hadn't seen before, one he suspected might indicate hope, or perhaps something more personal. Outside the sanctuary, the mercenaries continued their assault, unaware that they were already too late. The facility's greatest treasures, both the precursor knowledge and the proof of what different species could accomplish together, were already secure. Leona and Nico waited in companionable silence, no longer the grudging crash survivors, but something new, partners who had glimpsed each other's minds and found unexpected resonance. Whatever came next, they would face it together, just as the precursors had intended. In the crystal's shifting light, their shadows merged into a single form, neither fully human nor Ardani, but something altogether new.